You assume history began the moment someone learned to write it down. Before that, you imagine was silence. No numbers, no memory, no proof that anything happened at all. That assumption is wrong, and the evidence has been sitting in museum drawers for decades. 42,000 years ago, in what is now southern Africa, someone picked up the leg bone of a baboon and cut 29 notches into it. You know this object today as the Lubombo bone. It is older than cave paintings, older than farming, older than almost anything else humans ever made on purpose. 29 notches is suspiciously close to the number of days in a lunar cycle. Was someone tracking the moon before they could even track a season? You are looking at the first spreadsheet in human history, and it was carved with a stone tool by firelight. A second bone found further north, called the Ishango bone, takes the idea further. Discovered in 1950 by the Belgian geologist Jean de Heinzelin near Lake Edward, it carries 3 separate columns of notches, grouped in patterns that don't look random. Some columns cluster around 10. Others cluster around 20. The researcher Alexander Marshack later examined the bone under a microscope and proposed it was a 6-month lunar calendar cut by different tools at different times, meaning it was updated. Not made once and forgotten. Used again and again, like a running tally taped to a refrigerator. So your ancestors weren't just marking days. They were maintaining a record over time. That is the reframe you need to sit with for a second. A record is not the same thing as a memory. A memory lives and dies with the person who holds it. A record survives the person. It survives the season. It survives the death of everyone who was there when it was made. Writing did not invent that idea. Bone and bark did, tens of thousands of years earlier. Now walk forward in time, to around 8000 BC, in the farming villages of the ancient Near East. Grain is piling up. Sheep are multiplying. Debts are being made and owed. How do you prove someone owes you 3 goats when neither of you can write the word goat? The archaeologist Denise Schmandt-Besserat spent decades answering exactly that question. She studied thousands of small clay shapes, cones, spheres, discs, found scattered across ancient sites, and realized they weren't decorations or game pieces. They were tokens. A cone meant a small measure of grain. A sphere meant a larger measure. A disc meant a sheep. 1 token, 1 unit of goods. If you owed someone 3 sheep, you handed over 3 discs. Simple, physical. Impossible to argue with, because you could hold the debt in your hand. Here is the twist, and it's the kind that rewires how you think about writing itself. Merchants started sealing these tokens inside hollow clay balls, like a receipt locked in an envelope, so no one could tamper with the count later. But that created a new problem. Once the tokens were sealed inside, how could anyone check the amount without smashing the envelope open? Someone, whose name is lost to time, solved it by pressing each token into the wet clay surface before sealing it inside. Now, the outside of the envelope showed exactly what was hidden within. And then someone realized something even bigger. If the impression on the outside already told you everything, why put the tokens inside at all? Why carry the object when the mark of the object would do? That single realization that a symbol could replace the thing it represented is the moment historians now trace directly to the birth of cuneiform script around 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. Writing did not begin as poetry. It did not begin as prayer. It began as bookkeeping that got tired of carrying rocks. Halfway across the planet, a different civilization solved the same problem without clay at all. The Inca built an empire that stretched thousands of miles down the spine of South America, and they ran it using knotted cords called khipu. Colored strings, tied in specific knots, at specific positions, could record tax obligations, census counts, and calendar dates across an empire with no shared alphabet. The historian Gary Urton has spent years trying to fully decode them, and even now, some khipu remain unread, sitting in museum cases holding information nobody alive can access. Somewhere, a message from 500 years ago is still waiting for someone to finish translating it. None of these systems needed an alphabet. None of them needed a shared spoken language, either. A khipu could be read by a trained specialist called a khipu kamayuk, whose entire job was to interpret knots the way a modern accountant reads a spreadsheet. A clay token needed no translation, because a sheep-shaped mark meant sheep in any language spoken in the marketplace. A notch on a bone needed no dictionary, only a count. Before writing existed, Humans had already solved the two hardest problems that writing would later solve for them. How do you make information survive longer than a human lifespan? And how do you make information trustworthy to someone who wasn't there when it was created? Writing didn't invent trust. It inherited it. So think about what that means for you, right now, in a world where you back up your photos to a cloud you can't see and trust that a text message will still exist tomorrow. You didn't invent the anxiety of losing information. You inherited it from someone notching a bone by firelight, terrified of forgetting how many days had passed. You didn't invent the need to prove a debt either. Someone pressed a token into wet clay so a stranger couldn't lie about what they owed, thousands of years before either of you existed. Every time you save a file, or send a screenshot as proof, or set a reminder so you don't forget, you are doing the same job the Labambo bone did. You are refusing to let time erase what happened. You assumed history began the moment someone learned to write it down. It didn't. It began the moment someone refused to trust their own memory, picked up a bone, and cut the first mark into it.